Today's subject is another Frostgrave miniature. This is one of the Cultist Captains. Now, before we start painting, a quick point on assembly. The arms are separate, as is the cloak, and you can see the cloak, it's got a very, very thin point of contact. I've actually pinned this in 3 places, believe it or not, and used araldite to hopefully hold it in place. But if you're ever picking one of these kind of figures up, folks, don't pick it up front and back, because you could easily pinch that cloak off. Likewise with the arms, you could easily pinch the arms. They were araldited too, by the way. It's a very strong kind of epoxy glue if you're not familiar with it. So I'm going to hand this over to Mrs. Panzer Schule, and she's going to be doing the painting, and I'll be filming through the magnifier she uses. Starting with that big cloak that's flying out the back there, we're using leather brown. We're taking care to leave some shade colour, but not just in the lower areas, the flat areas. The flat deep areas will be getting a coat of paint. The shade will be in between all these layers we're putting on. You can see here, getting on the raised areas, but also into the flat area in between. Now, that's getting a highlight of beastie brown just on these raised areas, and you can see it's just adding a bit of depth to the overall finish. There'll need to be some of a highlight on the inside of the cloak too, but not too much. You're not going to see much of it, so just trying to catch a few raised areas, particularly around the bottom end of the cloak, where more light's going to be hitting it. And then a little highlight using orange brown just on the edges, the bottom edges, the top edges, just to help define the extent of the cape and where the light will be catching it the most. Nothing too strong here. A little bit underneath once again. You can see that final highlight really helping to define those torn edges. And then at this early stage in the process, it's a good time to do a bit of dry brushing on the chainmail, starting with London Grey and then moving on to some deck tan just for the outside edges. Now, with the base coat or the undercoat of German Camel Black Brown in place, we can just go straight in here with some German Camel Medium Brown, and then a highlight of US Field Drab with a few patches of Game Colour Heavy Ochre, just to get a little bit of variation in that sort of furry top that the cape has. And then eyes, the fun of painting eyes. Going in with some off-white, moving the figure around as much as required, getting the paint nice and thin so it flows off the brush, but look there, it's not so thin it's going to flow over the rest of the figure. And then back in with some German Camel Black Brown for a bit of a tidy up, and then just to draw a line through the centre of the eye. Eyes are such a chore, you want to paint them before you paint the rest of the face. Now the skin, the first coat of colour on the skin is Panzer Ace's Light Rust. It's a reddish kind of colour, as you can see. Being careful not to leave too much of that German Camel dark brown. We don't want the face to be too black looking. There's a moustache there as well, we'll tidy that up as we go. Being careful to leave a little bit of shade around those eyes though, make sure that they pop quite nicely. And when you paint a face, you know what a face is like, folks. You've got eyebrows, forehead, nose, cheeks, chin. Pick all these details out in the same way as you would, for instance, on a hand. It's got fingers. You can't see much of the hand here, but fingers, thumbs, tendons on the back of the hand, the ball of the hand, you know. Pick all these details out because the eye will know what they are and instantly be drawn to them if you can show them to the looker. Now, next colour is Game Colour Sulfurous Brown. So we're getting a bit of quite a jaundiced looking face here. And keeping that dark colour. We've been careful to leave some of that reddish rust colour as well. And the same in the hands. You can't see much of the hands here, but you're really just following the fingers, thumbs. If there was tendons visible, you would put up a line along them too. And then the highlight on the skin is flat flesh. It's quite a strong highlight, so we don't want to use too much, just on the areas that would catch most of the light. But you can see it's really starting to help that face, the details of the face really pop out. And then on the fingers, you just want to be catching the high points like knuckles. Don't put a highlight right along the fingers, it's not needed. You've got shade and mid-coat in there. And then we're going in with the moustache here. We're just paint it black with a little bit of grey and light grey for a highlight. It'll stand out strongly. In fact, brown, you'll call me brown here, folks. It'll stand out quite strongly against that reddish, pale reddish face. Now for the hood. For this we're using Game Colour. We're using Stormy Blue, as that's going to be the shade colour. Now we undercoated it black because any deep shade left through the undercoat, black's going to look better against blue than brown is going to look. So once the undercoat is on there of the Stormy Blue, we're going to use Heavy Blue and then Steel Grey as the highlight. So you can see we're leaving a little bit of black as a shade, a deep shade, but most of the shade, and that's really down in the folds across the shoulders. Most of the shade is going to be the blue, as you can see here. So that's a heavy blue going on, once again following the shape of the hood there and leaving some of the shade underneath. And then just follow the folds and the creases. You might be able to see the cape's taking a bit of a beating there. It's catching Mrs. Panzer Schule's fingers as she's working around the figure. So a little bit of touch-up work was needed there, and that's quite often the case. No matter how you hold a figure, depending on the figure, you might end up removing a bit of paint. The cloak was the main problem here because of the way it's been sculpted, but it's a very dramatic pose, so worth a bit of hassle. And then just working around, making sure we're leaving some of that deep shade that you can see, and then accentuating all of that with the highlight. Catching the edges. Now you notice you don't need to put the highlight around every single piece of the edge. It's not edge highlighting in the traditional sense, it's just catching the highlights and placing the highlight where possible right beside the shade colour to give the best possible depth. Like flat areas, a little bit of highlight beside a little bit of shade creates the illusion of depth. And you can see small lines here. Keep the paint flowing but not so wet that it will want to flood over the figure. It's just got to draw itself off the brush. If you're having to drag it off the brush, it's too dry. If it just flows away from the brush, then it's too wet. Now the boots, nice simple coat of, let me see, German camel medium brown, highlighted with some old wood. And then a bit of fabric tied around the ankles is green grey, highlighted with Panzer Aces splinter camouflage base. Quite tricky getting in there, as you can see, quite tricky even seeing it. There's so many bits of the figure sticking out here, and it's a bit tricky to show it as well, but we'll do our best. We'll be coming back to this green grey colour. Now the baggy trousers are a base coat of US field drab, and then the main colour is Panzer Aces old wood with a highlight of Iraqi sand. There's lots of folds in here so you can get some nice definition. Don't leave too much of the dark undercoat in there though, you just want to leave enough in the bottom of the deepest areas. Too much is going to look too stripy. And there's the old wood going on, leaving enough of the US field drab shade colour, so you're going to get a transition. And you can see there's a lot going on there, but it makes sense to the eye the way the shadows are. And then just to help define everything, you've got that Iraqi sand highlight. And there's a bit of eye-popping detail there, just drawing the eye and defining the shape. Now this bit of fabric I'm giving an Mrs. Panzer Schule is giving an undercoat of track primer. That's Panzer Aces track primer. That's a good sort of intermediate colour for green grey on larger areas, and that's what's getting put on just now. And the highlight for that once again is going to be Panzer Aces splinter camo base. You can see that highlight there, really quite strong. Don't put too much on, but it really catches the eye and brings those details out. There's various layers here, and you'll notice that we're painting from the inside out. That's the best way I can describe it. The deeper areas are getting painted before we paint the outer areas, so that any errors can easily be fixed. You know, you just a coat of German camel black brown to fix it. Now this next blue is ultramarine, game colour ultramarine, then model colour ultramarine, and then azure. So it's a slightly different blue, not quite as dark as the blue on the hood, a bit more saturated. And here we're getting back to the green grey again. There's a lot going on with this figure. You've got to figure out what bit of fabric goes with, you know, another bit of fabric. It's a bit tricky. Some of the fabric is under other bits of fabric, so you've got to try and figure out, like at the waistband you can see the green grey and the blue, to figure out what bit of fabric goes where. And like that, those bits hanging down under the arm, I am taking them to be a continuation of the fabric that's sitting directly over the trousers. So you've got to make your mind up what's going to go where, how you're going to, you know, connect the figure up to try and create the story of what it is and not have it too disjointed looking. And using a lighter colour here is also good for framing the darker chainmail armour. Right, we're back to the medium brown here, sorry. And we're going to highlight that with some orange brown for a bit of a leathery look. That's going on the pouches and it's going to go on the belt. And you can see the bag there and the side has been given an undercoat again of track primer. It's a bit tricky filming this at the moment just because of the way the hands are, with the axes and swords sticking out. And then the bag. Now, where's the colour for this, folks? I think we're using light mud and a highlight of deck tan. And then the red there is just red with cavalry brown as the highlight colour. And the teeth is just camel splinter base with a highlight of deck tan, just to get them looking a bit like teeth. And in the metal, using two different colours here, we're starting with basalt grey for some areas. Now these areas have all been undercoated with black once again, because grey and brown don't go particularly well together in terms of shading and highlighting. You really need a black shade in there. And there's a lot of metal parts to this figure. And then we've got a highlight of London grey. See, just catching the edges, but try to leave some shade colour on. Building up a bit of depth once again. And then the London grey is getting put onto the sword and the axe. And then a bit of deck tan on the cutting edges and on the serrations, starting to just build up some points of light. They're working the edges a bit, once again with deck tan. And the same on the other metal parts. And these are going to be our sort of highest points of light, with the lights glinting off the metal. And a little bit of white for the highest points. Now we're giving this a glaze of red. Glazes are good for non-metallic metal areas. I'm only doing the blades with the red. And then we've got German camel beige with deck tan as a highlight on the axe handle. Now the sword and axe, we did a bit more work on that off camera to put the highlights back in. Apologies for not capturing that. So we're pretty much done, just a couple of bit of tidying up to do and fix that cape, and then onto the basing, but it will let you see the finished figure.